Hi everyone, welcome. What you see behind me are the bins that I often refer to as my compost barrel and my outdoor worm bag. And the compost barrel is just kind of an anything goes, all the kitchen scraps, garden waste, weeds, you name it, trimmings from the garden, although the garden's history at this point. It's mid-November and you can see most of the leaves off the trees have ended up on the ground at this point. And it's usually the tree that's right above us that we get our shade from, but in order to get a little bit of shade over here in the bin that we're going to be tending to, the outdoor worm bag, we're in a spot right over here in the shade of the tree to try to reduce the harsh sunlight and work in the shade for a little bit more even light coverage. So we're going to get into this thing after 10 days since it was last fed. I would imagine it's probably pretty hungry, so let me get myself situated and we'll get up close and see how things are doing in here. So to feed these guys today, I've got the coffee out of the coffee machine when I reset it last night, and down in here just a variety of different frozen stuff, a lot of which came from my mom. Almost all. No, the cabbage here, the pumpkin, those all came from here, although originally my mom gave me the pumpkin as decoration for the house, but once the squirrels ripped a hole into the side of it, it was destined to become worm food. I think that these leaves here too are also from my mom. Whatever it is that's wrapped in this paper towel is from my mom. All those rotted asparaguses, those are all from my mom too. So constantly getting all kinds of nourishment from my mom to give to the worms. So what comes to mind each time I go into this bin is how big it is and how heavy it is. And it kind of makes me forget that the system's really not even that old, nor has it had a great number of feedings. It's really only a little bit over 100 days old. The last time we checked in on it, it was still just shy of being 100 days old. And last time we checked in on it and fed it, it was the system's 11th feeding. So it really makes me kind of wonder, either, have I been super generous with the food and the bedding to make the entire volume of the system be so much so quickly? What the heck is that? Well, here we go. Some examples of stuff that I really would prefer not to see in my worm bins if the system was down in my basement. But since it's out here, it's kind of anything goes in a way. Not really. It's not like my outdoor compost barrel, where it is a very much more anything goes kind of point of view. Here, since it is worms that I'm tending to, I don't know why, I feel like I want to keep the stuff clean to a certain point. Perhaps it's because, I envision the worms that are in here as possibly ending up downstairs in my wormery at some point in the future. Sometimes I just wonder if it's a matter of just waiting a little bit longer until the weather gets so cold that these little larvae and these other creatures in the bin can't take it anymore, and then since the worms are a little tougher, maybe then try to migrate the worms and leave all the rest behind or something like that. So I guess that's really kind of future thinking in terms of what to do when the time comes to get these worms cut loose on some sort of a new environment, let them continue their work after the material in this system has broken down to a certain point. But for today, since this is the system's 12th feeding and the system's only about 100 and some odd days old, maybe less than 110 days old, I can't remember, I think we can just go full bore with it this time like we normally do in most of my bins. Adding bedding. I bought my bedding from downstairs up here today. I bought my grit collection. I came a little bit more well equipped today to deal with these worms than I did last time. Last time I just came out here with some food. I didn't grab my gloves from the basement. I used some gloves from the garage. I didn't bring bedding. I didn't bring grit. All I did was throw in an apple, a couple kiwi, and some chunks of pumpkin. And from what I remember, this stuff was placed pretty low down in the system. So we might have to dig a bit before we can finally get down to it and see how it's progressing. Oh, I think we're finally encountering some of it. I thought it looked like it might have been the apple. And in a way, I suspected that the apple might be the slowest of the foods that they got last time to break down. But you can see the worms are definitely all over the thing. I believe that the thing in here that I fed with last time that I expect the least to still be around is the pumpkin, because the pumpkin has been, you know, on a lot of people's channels since it was just Halloween season. It's still mid-November, and people are still looking to do away with their jack-o'-lanterns and their Halloween decorations. So a lot of people are feeding with pumpkins, and I saw an example in one video where the stuff had been placed into the bin and 5 days later it was all gone. Kind of surprising me that there's still a chunk of it right here, but it's certainly not very big, that's for sure. I think there was one apple, maybe 2 kiwis. Whoa. And the pumpkin, I believe there were quite a number of chunks of pumpkin. So we must be coming down into where the majority of the food was, because you could see I don't even know if it's in the frame because the camera might be out of view of this mound of worms that I just pulled out of the hole there. Got quite a worm party happening here. I could tell when I ran my fingers through the material right before I scooped it out that it was going to be a high concentration of worms hanging out in the stuff. I guess I'm just trying to be careful to dig out a minimum amount out of this hole so I don't end up building up this huge mound around the edge so that it like spills out the sides. It's just so strange. I don't know how we got to the point where there's so much stuff in this bin. I don't remember myself feeding overly generously in it, but maybe I have and I just didn't notice it. I don't remember myself using extraordinary amounts of bedding in here, but maybe I have and I just didn't notice it. But this is definitely a much heavier system than most of the systems that I run down in my basement. And just from looking through each handful of material I scoop out of where the last feeding was applied, it does seem to me like this is an extremely heavily populated system. So now here we're encountering a kiwi. Kiwi is something I don't really feed very often, so I'm not really sure what to expect when it comes to that stuff. So when I placed it in here last time, I didn't really know what to think in terms of how long it would take. Now this one here, I just ruptured it when I was poking around. I could feel it tear and open up. But I got a feeling, just based on the fact that it's all gooey and moist inside, that alone I think is going to cause a lot of worms to just be drawn to it, just from the moisture itself. I'm sure that just the fruity content of it as well is going to draw some attention too. I mean, you would almost think with this much food here left over from last time, do we really want to add more? I think if you're a regular on my channel, you'll know the answer to that without even having to hear it from me. I usually treat all the leftovers as stuff that the worms are able to just continue ripping into right away or very soon in the near future. And the stuff that I'm putting in at the present time, I treat as, you know, the stuff that they can eventually start getting to once it starts breaking down. But it's kind of a rare occasion in my worm systems to see me come prepared with some food that I intend to give the worms and then end up backing out of the game plan. For me, it's usually committed. As soon as I pull it out of the freezer, it's committed to be worm food that day, usually. Unless, you know, some sort of extraordinary circumstances prevail, telling me that it's better not to do that. So I'm definitely near the rim on this thing. And that's the weird thing, you know, I'm not used to getting that close to capacity in my systems after only 100 days. Maybe I just started out with a great deal more material in this system when we launched it. I don't remember what led up to me having a system that just seems so big, you know, in volume. A lot of people that run 55-gallon drums or huge flow-through systems or mammoth bags or whatever the case may be, you guys might be thinking that's nothing. My system's puny compared to what you guys normally run, but me, I I tend to run smaller systems, so, you know, from my point of view, this is quite a big, heavy system compared to what I'm used to. I have thought about not adding bedding at some point in the near future and start steering this thing towards harvest. See if I could let them kind of focus their energy on all the residual stuff that still remains in the system. I mean, everywhere you look, there's certainly lots of castings, but tons and tons of leftover bedding and food everywhere. So I think the system would do just fine if we were to, you know, even ignore it for a month or two. It would just keep chugging away at the foods that are in here already, and the worms would have plenty to eat as far as I'm concerned. So let's start rebuilding this system and get the feeding in here. So I'm going to go ahead and use some of my pre-made bedding. It's been soaking, it's damp, it's leaves and shredded paper, shredded cardboard. I threw about 2 handfuls in there, and that's quite a bit. Let's start applying the coffee that I bought out here for them. I'm going to mix it in a little bit. Now, you know, I think the easiest way to handle this is to simply dump it. And it is a huge quantity of food. So much so that it was busting through the side of the bag. So this is quite possibly one of the largest feedings I've given this system ever. And yeah, these chunks of asparagus are kind of exaggerating the appearance of the feeding, because they're just sticking out all over the place, so they're not really occupying as much space as they appear to be. Same thing goes with stuff like this, a big pile of leaves. It's mainly moisture and air. You know, as soon as the moisture seeps out of it and the air is all the gaps in between, all the loose items in between each other is accounted for. There's really not all that much there. Alrighty. So now I think you might have spotted some of the other stuff that was going in at the time when I was dumping it in, but maybe not. This was just a whole bunch of cabbage. From what I remember, I threw some chunks of mushroom down into one of the leaves before I threw it into the freezer. Some of the stuff you see down low over here are chunks of frozen pumpkin. Everything came out of the freezer, everything but the coffee. So all this stuff, as it thaws, I assume is going to emit a good deal of moisture all over the place. So all that paper we just threw down in the feeding area, even though it's a little bit damp, it is still got the capability of absorbing some more moisture, because it is damp, but it's not soaking wet damp. So to me, it always seems like a good idea to surround my feedings with all kinds of paper materials or leaves or whatever, stuff that I know is going to be capable of soaking in a good deal of the moisture that just went in. Here's some more coffee that's spilled, but I think we've pretty much given them everything that we intended to give them today. It's funny because I'll usually hang on to my coffee filters and use them as an indicator over the last feeding, but it's something I just never seem to do here in my worm bin. It just seems obvious that in my outdoor worm system here that I'm feeding down the middle. Maybe because it's a round shaped system, I don't know why, but we've never gotten into the habit of marking where the last feeding had been placed in this system. So we're just going to take that coffee filter and include it as supplemental bedding down in the feeding area as we start returning all these chunks of food that we excavated. I was a little bit surprised to find leftovers, especially the pumpkin. I thought that the pumpkin would be ripped to shreds and gobbled up already by this time, but I'm sure by the next time we check in on it, it'll be pretty close to being done, if not completely done. This is like a peach pit, something that I don't expect to see get eaten anytime soon. It'll most likely come out of the bin with the worms when the time comes to harvest. So yeah, I think for the most part we've collected up all the old and new foods that were spilled in here and collected out of here and returned down into the middle. This is a piece of potato. I put in raw potato probably 2 months ago, and it's still crunchy and not yet infiltrated. That stuff I feel like I've really got to break it up every time I bump into it, because on its own it feels like it's going to take forever to break down. But maybe with a little bit of help from me, we can help it get there at some point soon. So yeah, I think 100 and maybe 8 days. I'm trying to remember the exact age of this bin. Maybe 108 days, and I'm pretty sure this is feeding number 12. Here's another piece of paper of some sort. Might have been another coffee filter. And the system just, you could tell, it's loaded with worms. So I'm always a little bit surprised when I find leftovers in here. I'm always kind of assuming that it's the type of system that's going to burn through everything we give it, 1, 2, 3. But I do have to also keep in mind the fact that this is a system that's subject to temperature changes. And overnight we've been hitting temperatures close to freezing on a number of occasions now, and we're still just in mid-November, which means the temperatures are going to continue to drop. Things are going to continue to get chillier and chillier overnight and even during the day. And luckily these worms don't seem too phased by it. They just keep going, they keep chugging away. Although maybe because of the cold, maybe their throughput, so to speak, the amount of stuff that they're consuming on a regular basis might be a little bit less than usual. You know what? I forgot to add grit, but it's right here and we haven't covered it up yet, so I'm going to apply some grit, but today it's just going to get sprinkled across the top of the surface so that whatever worms come up to hang out on the surface, that's where they're going to find their little treat of extra grit, which the system didn't get last time. Like I said before, last time I fed only foods. I gave no supplementary bedding. I gave no grit. So this is kind of more of a return to normal. Although for me, normal a lot of times also means holding off on the application of bedding in a bin that's approaching harvest. So I do sometimes wonder if it might come time soon to maybe feed only foods and not add extra bedding, and then maybe even at some point soon halt all the applications of fresh food and let the worms really focus on all the leftovers that are still floating within the bin, because there's a whole bunch of it, and they would do just fine without a feeding. Like I said earlier, I bet you they would do fine even for a month or two without me checking in on them with what's left in this system as far as leftovers and residual bedding and food. So what do you think? I think this bin's doing really nice. And like I mentioned, sometimes people bring an end to their systems for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's out of desperation for wanting the castings already. Other times it's the capacity of the system that you're doing the work in, and here, man, we are close to being full. So I don't know, I might just call it quits because of the fact that we're running out of room in here. So I don't know, I'll have to decide at some point, but it does seem like we're nearing the limit of this container's capacity, and oh my goodness, it is heavy, way heavier than any of my indoor systems, that's for sure too. All right, everyone, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.